where we are. So today we're going to keep talking about React, but in particular we're going to be looking at how to maintain state in a React application. Although we already can do that by using the out-of-the-box mechanism that React provides of each component maintaining its own state. But we've already seen some of the challenges of doing that, where you have high-level containers having to provide some of the the state manipulation of itself plus any other states, any other components that child components of that container, right? And oftentimes having to move data up and down from in the tree of components, right? By feeding properties down the chain to the children, and then the children having to feed back data up, or events back up to the parent to handle and manipulate the actual state. So today we're going to look at an alternative way of doing it, which is redux. Redux is an alternative mechanism for maintaining state that solves one of these challenges of having to share state amongst components and shuffling this data back and forth, and also shuffling actions and events up and down the tree, right, the component tree. One of the side effects of using Redux is that it's going to separate those two concerns, right? One of the concerns is I have data, I have events, and my responsibility as a component is to render that data. Okay, somebody's going to provide that data to me, and my only responsibility is to render it. That's it. That's all my responsibility. It will not be my responsibility to maintain that state. Okay, so I only have that one responsibility. It'll be somebody else's responsibility to maintain state. Okay, so any dependencies that I might have are specifically any properties that I have in the argument list. Right. So what that allows me to do is to write stateless components that are much easier to test independently, right, all by themselves. If they have their own state, then it makes it much more harder to test a component because you have to consider all the different state that a component might be in, right, and provide state tests for each one of those states, right. So to verify that it behaves one way, then you have to make sure to put the component in a particular state, and then verify that it behaves correctly. Instead, if it's functional, you know that it'll always behave the same exact way whenever you give it the same type of input into the component. So the testing of the component becomes so much easier because it's completely self-contained, right? It doesn't depend on any state back and forth of how it evolves over time. So you remove the time constraints and the time dependency, and it becomes so much easier to test. So that's what Redux buys us, right? Unfortunately, it does introduce some level of complexity, right? In particular, because Redux is not specific to React, right? So it's not part of the core library of React. So it needs to have some plumbing that connects the two libraries together, and that's really where the challenge is of creating the plumbing of React talking to Redux and how to connect the two, and that's where most people find most challenging, right? Just plugging these two things together, right? So what I'll try to do is to talk about these two worlds. And see how these two worlds then connect, how the plumbing gets built. Once the plumbing is done, it then becomes really easy, right? And ideally, you would do the plumbing only once, and then forget about the plumbing, and then just concentrate on just using it, right? And once you've done it a couple of times, then it'll become second nature. But it's that first bump of getting over that plumbing that is the really hard part, okay? So anyway, so today we'll do Redux, more on React. We'll add a couple of features on the learning management system that we're building, In this case, it'll be being able to work on the widgets, right? Last week we worked on using React, plain old React.js, to do the navigation of courses to modules to lessons to topics. So all the navigation, all the dynamic navigation. Today we'll focus. This week we'll focus on adding the dynamic widget lists, right? And so we'll use Redux for that. Okay. Ideally, you would make a project entirely Redux or entirely React.js state manipulation. Here we're marrying the two, which typically you would not do, unless you have a lot of invested effort on creating an already existing React and just rebuilding it. Just is very, very, very tough to rebuild something that has already gone one way or another. Okay. Nevertheless, we'll see ways that you can have them talk to one another. Right? You will have part of the application using Redux and part of the application not using Redux, which is also interesting, where you might want to do that. But typically, you wouldn't. If you have the choice, you would not do that. Okay? But nevertheless, it's an academic occasion to introduce that typical how to do that. Okay. So yeah, next week we're not meeting next week, unfortunately. So this notice that we've been focusing on implementing all this on the client side. We haven't used the server for almost anything, only to host our client side application up to this point. There's the single page applications, jQuery and whatnot, and React and that. Next week, or when we come back, we'll start introducing more of the server, right? How to maintain state on the server. How to implement RESTful web APIs, and how to make the data storage permanently. Okay, so that will start next week. So web services and JPA, and then after a couple of weeks on doing that, more React. Right, we'll do more and more React over here. So it'll be 4 weeks of React. Then we'll switch gears. We'll be done with the faculty side of the application, and we'll focus more on the student side of the application. Remember, we're doing a learning management system, and there's 2 audiences here, right? The faculty who are building the content, and then the students who are consuming that content, right? So we'll focus on the student side, and when we come back, on October 29th, and we'll build that using Angular. Right, so it's a mix and match of lots and lots of technologies, which is very common, especially on applications that have been going on for years, and you see a plethora of technologies, and you can see the history of the application, how it has gone through multiple iterations. It's very common, and typically companies don't have the kind of resources to just throw something away and just rebuild it from scratch, right? So they'll add like that. Anyway, all right. So let's talk about Redux.